You're listening to the K-State Radio Network, and it's good to have you aboard once more for Agriculture Today. Time now for our weekly grain market analysis and comment featuring grain market economist Dan O'Brien, K-State Research and Extension, from his office in Colby, Northwest Kansas, of course. Let's begin on the grain export update as we have the numbers to date. Now, Dan, if one looks at those, for wheat and soybeans, they look rather lethargic, those sales figures. Corn is the notable and favorable exception, you say.
This week, or the latest numbers out from the USDA on their weekly foreign ag service export report, there's 53 million bushels of corn exports that were shipped out of the U.S. And we need a pace of about 49 million to meet the USDA's projection of 1.775 billion bushels. And, you know, with a USDA WASDE report coming up, World Ag Supply Demand Estimates numbers in the next week, it's very important to have pace to give the USDA confidence in retaining and not changing that export number. Now, you know, since we're talking about corn, we have exports to the high side. There's some positive news for corn. As the gasoline market starts to do better, and oil and gasoline both moving steadily higher, you see ethanol prices at Kansas plants, according to USDA numbers, at $1.11, and had been well below $1 in the worst of it. I think it's 89 cents or something like that. So, and the overall U.S. ethanol, the Iowa ethanol prices had been down to about 70 cents. Now they're up to $1.10 a gallon. So you're getting that much closer to bringing at least break-even situations. Well, I guess the possibility of profits coming back, and or at least closer to break-even, and with that, you know, as we're coming into the season where people are certainly anxious to get out of the house and go travel and do whatever. So all that bodes well, I guess, for where the corn market, where the ethanol industry goes, corn usage and the like. And we haven't heard anything yet. At least I have not heard much yet of feed grain usage dropping off. You know, so doesn't seem to be a surprise there. You add that in to this issue of that we talked about just a minute ago of pretty strong corn exports, and you know, corn, which had been down to about 310, closed yesterday at about 329, and that's not 350, it's not 375 or $4, but the trend is in a positive direction. And you know, again, we'll kind of hit on corn while we're talking on it. Crops pretty well planted. Just rainfall expected. Nothing standing in the way yet of that. You do hear of changing weather patterns towards La Nina, El Nino. All that's coming into play again. Still a long ways to go before we can declare we've got a tremendous corn crop. But that tremendous 15 billion bushel corn crop is, quote, out there as a risk. And I guess that for sure has corn producers' attention. Wouldn't be surprised if we get to, you know, if we do get to 350, 370 D's corn futures, that people will probably, you know, given that risk that's out there, probably be pretty anxious, more anxious than perhaps normal, to look at some forward pricing. And since we're talking corn, I might mention on grain sorghum, if there's anything that you hear out in the country, it's that with stronger performance we've seen in grain sorghum exports of late, that it may be affecting acreage in the western part of the state, particularly in some of those dry areas. So we'll see. The tail of the tape is always with the seed corn dealers and the seed sorghum dealers. And I have not heard in the Eastern Corn Belt of those reports that you hear when there's a lot of acreage switching. But we do hear some of that from our agronomic brethren here at KSU, of farmers discussing with them planting more sorghum acres. So we'll see. The sorghum weeks they tend to be up and down in terms of the pace. This most recent week, about 3.7 million bushels. Unit pace about 7.4 to hit the USDA's projections. And Jim, that's that's kind of par for the course. I would say when you look at basis levels, still in central Kansas, eastern Kansas, Topeka, Concordia, the Topeka and Salina basis levels are 35 over for sorghum. So that's and the corn basis levels at the same community, as well as say Salina, is at about 30 under July. So there's that would seem to be a pretty strong signal that there's still export demand going out there, or at least the expectation of it within the industry, and that when we see terminal bids like that strong, they're probably not feeding it in central Kansas. they're putting on trains and sending it someplace.
So more than a few stars are aligning, it would sound, on the feed grain side, Dan. Back to the export numbers of late for wheat and for soybeans. Again, they don't impress, although there are some more encouraging signs of what may be happening with beans continuing to move to China.
Well, yes, in this row over politics and trade, which has been those two have been hand in hand in terms of the U.S. and China here in the last year or so. China had come out earlier in the week within the last week or so, indicated that they were going to stop purchases of certain key products from the U.S., and I think soybeans was one of them. But then we have had reports almost on the very heels of that there were purchases made. Market moved higher yesterday on reports of strong soybean meal export demand. There are some questions, I think, out of South America that still, even with their quantities of production, coronavirus issues in Brazil that still have potential to affect their logistics. Really, news out of Argentina, some more mounting evidence that Argentina may not be able to provide as much to the market as had been thought. And I need to study those reasons more. But all of that here, you saw soybeans close up a dime yesterday, a dime to 11, 12 cents, and a little higher. Got into March 2021 at up 12 and a quarter cents. May 21 up 14 and a half. So, that's not just a trifling 1 or 2 cents higher on people thinking there's something that might happen. Quote, those are substantial moves. So there's news in the market, worry about alternative supplies, and it is as it is. I would say that we have been watching the value of the U.S. dollar, and that has been moving to the lower side. Dropped 4, 5, 6%, and all that helps U.S. export competitiveness. So ups and downs, but in the export market. But on the one hand, we saw the public pronouncements that don't seem to be consistent, by China, that don't seem to be consistent with what's actually happening in the cash market. So we'll see.
As we know, the combines will be rolling here very soon in Kansas. Wheat harvest is not that far away, right around the corner, actually. And there's nothing better that a producer would like to hear than a jolt in exports. But we're not seeing that. Is that anywhere on the horizon?
Well, the latest numbers, about 28 million bushels of wheat exports. And for the longest time, we were struggling at 12, 13, 14 million bushels a week, actual shipments. And here in the last week, well, right at the very end of this old crop marketing year, we jumped to 28. Coupled with news from I guess weather services, they're looking at hot, dry conditions forecast, and not just triflingly hot, dry, really hot and dry conditions forecast for Russia. So so you saw the wheat market also moved to the high side yesterday, up again 14 and a half cents. Now, when we think of major moves, we think of limit moves of 25, 30 cents, but this is halfway there, and this is nothing small. So that You know, when you look at major U.S. wheat export competitors, the first place we're going is Ukraine and Russia. Ukraine, I think, still has pretty good crop prospects from what I've heard, what analysis I've seen. But now there's some question about Russia, and that's a quote big deal in the wheat markets.
We'll keep an eye on that. Let's squeeze in one more thing here. This is captured in your weekly notes on the grain trades as well. And you're watching closely now what's happening with speculative trading in the futures. And that's often an indicator of where one might be headed in each of these markets for the forthcoming weeks. What are you seeing, Dan?
The commodity futures trading numbers come out on Friday afternoons. So the data you have is a week old and a week trailing. So the last data we have is as of May the 26th. And at that time, you still had a lot of bearishness. So think back to where that was. It seems like a half a year ago compared to everything that's been happening in the U.S. and around the world. But anyway. You saw the net spec trade position heading lower for corn. I think by the time we see what's going on now, I would think that you don't have increasing sell positions, short positions when the market's moving higher. Here the market's been moving higher. When you see what's happened for soybeans, they had been improving really since. Well, for the last several months, kind of up and down. Again, I would not be surprised that by the time we see what's happened this week, when that'll have moved higher. And really, the question for us is this odd situation where harvest is just about upon us in the hard red winter wheat world, and yet we saw prices jump 14.5 cents, and really the short position for the specs, although it's been bouncing around, has been trending to the positive side. Less bears, more longs. So out of all surprise, here we see the markets on the verge of wheat harvest in Kansas tending to move higher, and wheat being the strongest of all. And has a lot to do with, yes, what we see for some damage in Kansas, but that international export competitive issue is jumping up. And I can think of twice. I think it's 2010, 2012, I believe. I look back to those. You want to trust but verify. When we got into July and August, and something happened over in the Black Sea region, and the wheat futures jumped. So we don't. Can you anticipate that and rest on it? No, but when you see something like this happening, it does point out the potential for what weather conditions elsewhere in the world amongst a major wheat export competitor could do to the Kansas wheat market.
It obviously will bear watching, which we will do in our regular sessions right here every Friday. And again, producers, get a glance at Dan's weekly notes on the grain trades at agmanager.info. Dan, as always, much obliged.
Thanks, Eric. Take care.
He's along with us each week to talk grain markets, grain market economist, K-State Research and Extension, Dan O'Brien. And you're listening to Agriculture Today.